My name's Guy Kestevan. I've been a mountain bike and kit tester for over 25 years, and this is my tech talk around to go with the live ride review on Yeti's brand new SB135. A bike that deliberately ignores current fashion in favour of maximum fun, and that Yeti are dubbing the dopamine machine. And the reason for that is because if we go up to this front wheel, it's 27.5. Yep, that's right folks, the wheel size that you thought had just retreated to the back of bikes and everything was either mullet or full 29 is on both ends of this new SB135, and that instantly gives it a more responsive, more agile and, well, basically faster turning, faster reacting front end, which they've really capitalized on with the rest of the bike as well. I mean, obviously, if you want to know how this bike rides, then watch the live ride review. It's been properly educational as well as massively entertaining, charging this bike up and down my favourite trails here on Ilkley Moor. But this is your chance to have a look at the up-close specifics of the design and the geometry and stuff like that. So, start with the geometry. Although most brands, when they go for smaller wheels, or traditionally when they went for smaller wheels, would add a slacker head angle to add that stability in terms of the geometry, Yeti have still stuck with a relatively lively head angle on this bike. So this is the lunch ride version, the T3 lunch ride version to be exact. But that means it gets a 160mm version of the Fox 36 factory fork. But even with that 36 in there, head angle is still 65 degrees rather than 65.4 as it would be on the 150mm forked standard version. And then you've got a seat angle of 76.5 degrees and then a reach on this large of 475mm. You've got what Yeti are calling a low bottom bracket height, but at 440mm it's actually pretty high by most standards, but it is the lowest bottom bracket of any full suspension Yeti that they do. You've got different sized rear ends. This large gets a 435, and you get 5 different frame sizes on this bike. And what's really interesting is because 27.5 obviously appeals to smaller riders, because you know you're getting a proportionately smaller wheel, so it doesn't feel quite as kind of strung out between two massive 29er wheels. They actually run a different shock setup and a completely different frame on the extra small and small bikes. So rather than the shock being mounted up on the top tube there, the shock actually mounts onto the down tube, and that gives them room still for a standard bottle. Even though they've actually raised the belly of the bike by 25mm, you've still got room for a bottle in the belly of the bike, even with this piggyback Float X Fox shock in there. And you're getting shorter seat tubes on all the sizes, so you can run along. So you're getting shorter seat tubes on all the sizes, and so you can run a longer. So you're getting shorter seat tubes on all the sizes, so you can run a longer dropper post. And also standover is increased on all sizes, as is ground clearance on that belly in front of the bottom bracket there. So basically Yeti has reconfigured their geometry to provide a better fit for almost everyone. So basically Yeti has reconfigured their geometry slightly to provide a better fit for everyone, which is, you know, something, well, literally everyone can get behind. And to match the increased agility of the wheels, it's actually slightly shorter than the 29er bikes. So they haven't tried to create a similar riding bike to the 29er by slackening and lengthening it. They've actually made it slightly shorter and slightly steeper, because they figure that anyone going for 27.5-inch wheels is probably going to want a more agile, responsive bike overall anyway. So why make them the same? Why not kind of, well, celebrate the differences in the geometry as well as the ride vibe? And this bike uses the latest version of Yeti's unique Switch Infinity suspension setup. So it's got reinforced linkages up here, this really clever 2-piece scissor linkage that holds the shock top and bottom, and then goes into this little rocker linkage which connects to the main frame there. And then where the real genius of Switch Infinity is it's in these 2 little sliding posts down the bottom, as you can see, Kashima coated for maximum smoothness, just like the fork legs and the shock shaft are. And they actually, this latest version of Switch Infinity gets new bushings, it gets new bearings in there, and generally a much tougher, less maintenance hungry package, and actually give the whole bike, in terms of warranty and the Switch Infinity mechanism, a lifetime warranty. And it's lifetime warranted against frame defects as well. And all the pivots are now collet pivots, so they're mechanically kind of squeezed together as you tighten them up, which again improves service life, increases stiffness, and all the Switch Infinity bikes I've ridden just feel tighter and more together than the previous ones, and there should be less concerns about maintenance going forwards as well. Like I say, you know, the proof of the pudding is in the riding, but this Switch Infinity basically works by, as the suspension goes through its travel, that is the main pivot, and it actually rises and then drops, what they call the inflection point, as it goes through the stroke. So to halfway through this 135mm stroke, the bike is kind of in its more sort of pedal responsive, more anti-squat, more anti-rise phase, so it feels stiffer and tauter under power. And then as it rises through the inflection point and then goes past it, the pivot drops again, so it then becomes plusher, more able to take bigger hits, more succulent traction, and basically a much smoother, more capable feel to the rear end. And I've actually just flipped it round so you can see it more clearly from here, and you can see that that slider is grease ported as well for easy lubrication without pulling it apart for servicing. But I mean, the best way I can describe it is that Switch Infinity just does exactly what you want at exactly the time you want it to do it, but it does it with a mechanical way rather than it relying on sort of sentient electronics or some kind of algorithm. So it's just a fantastic system to ride, whether you're, you know, blasting through rock gardens and you need maximum plushness, or you're properly on the hustle through the pedals. And because it's essentially a short linkage system, that means you can run this big single piece organic looking rear swing arm there with post-mount brakes on there. It gets code calipers both ends. You've got really neat rear brake hose route in there, captured at both ends of the swing arm out on the main frame, and then another little capture there on the main pivot. As I say, you've got room for a bottle cage in there. There's another look at that multi-part linkage. You can see it's a properly stout ingot of alloy in there now, holding everything together. And all the bikes get this piggyback Float X Fox damper for maximum kind of heat absorption, and you've got low speed compression and rebound adjustment on there as well. And then coming up to the head end, you've got another neatly clamped cable port there. This bike's running wireless axis, so you don't need a cable there, but obviously you've got the mount for the cable there if you need it. And coming around to the drive side again, you can see you've got really nice sculpted chain protection armor all the way around the rear swing arm. You've got that UDH hanger, so it's compatible with this latest SRAM XOT type transmission. And then you've got more armor there along the belly. One thing you haven't got is internal storage, because Yeti have kept with this relatively slim down tube on there to preserve the quality of the ride feel, rather than going for somewhere you can store your butties or your inner tubes. But there's plenty of places you can add a strap on if you need to. And in terms of spec, we've already talked about this lunch ride getting the 160mm fork, but proper Fox factory 36 with your Grip 2 damper up there for your low and high speed compression adjustment. Fantastic fork, and it's got those little pressure release ports on there, which the hack I've just learned recently with these is if you like preload the fork slightly and then blip those on both sides, it actually sucks the fork down into its travel slightly. It gives you a super supple stroke off the top, zero chatter on there. You're getting really nice ODI grips. You've got the shifter pod there for your T-type transmission. You've got old school code brakes on there. They're not the stealth ones, but to be honest, functionally they're exactly the same. You just don't have to worry about your cables banging into your bars. And obviously there's no internal headset routing on the controls as well, which I think most people with any kind of who do any work on the bike are just going to be overjoyed about. You've got Yeti's own carbon bars in a super generous 800mm width, so you might want to chop those down if you're janking between tight trees, but for properly getting your lean on, this has been excellent. And then you've got Bergtech Enduro stem, you've got a custom Yeti WTB saddle, box transfer post, although slight miss there, it's a black shaft on there, it's not a factory, so it's not collars and cuff with the shock and fork, which is a bit of a shame, but in terms of functionality, a great dropper post. And speaking of functionality, you've got these DT Swiss EX 1700 rims, alloy wheel set, so you know some bikes you're going to be getting carbon wheels at this cost. You've got a super durable wheel set in terms of alloy rims and the the legendary DT Swiss 350 hubs in there, and really kind of anchors this bike in terms of how stiff and responsive it feels on the trail. And talking of anchoring, you also get Maxxis Assegai up front in 3C Max Terra 2.5 on the front, and both ends get Exo Plus protection, so you've got a little bit more sidewall reinforcement than armouring, which means you can run those pressures a little bit softer, because trust me, this is a bike that loves to get sideways and jib and rip at every opportunity. So with a lighter weight casing, you'd definitely be at risk of burping some air out of there on a regular basis. But as it is, had zero problems with this tyre and wheel setup. I said T-Type Exo transmission on there with the new 1052 cassette, and then, which I've done a separate review video on, which I'll link to at this point. And then swinging forward, you've got that fantastic looking XO alloy chain set. One thing you haven't got, you have got ASCG tabs behind there for a chain guide, but you haven't got the little segments on there for bouncing the chainring off rocks, which I'd be tempted to add to this bike. It's the kind of bike that almost, you know, it's the kind of bike, it's so good on sort of trialsy type terrain. I'd be tempted to add those little optional SRAM segments just to protect the chainring and the chain on there. And if you look up here just behind the stem, you can see it's a Turk frame, which is Yeti's top end composite layup. They do C-series complete bikes as well, which are a little bit cheaper and just as stiff and strong, but not quite as light and tight in feel. And as much as this is a premium bike by any standards, Yeti just have a fantastic heritage of building properly innovative, interesting tech into really, really finely engineered frame sets. And this SB135 and the current Switch Infinity range of bikes is just a perfect example of this. Yes, it does cost a ton of money, but they feel truly special to ride, whether that's through the suspension or just the whole sort of chassis dynamic. And the fact that the different carbon layups for every frame size, different geometries for every frame size, so all the bikes feel completely proportional. You know, those are just a little bit of extra that you're paying for, as well as the fact that, you know, if you're riding a Yeti, you are seriously flexing on the trail, and you're getting the performance you paid for as well, which isn't always the case. I mean, to be fair, it's not always been the case with Yeti. There was quite a time when their geometry was well behind the curve, but they're properly on it now. Their current generation is absolutely bang on. And it's just nice to have a completely different wheel size option to, well, to be honest, almost anyone else is providing. You know, there's only, now that Santa Cruz don't even make the 5010 as a 27.5 and the Bronson's gone MX as well, there are very, very few premium 27.5 wheel options. And if you go on a lot of forums when this bike was launched, you'll realise there are still a lot of fans of mid-sized wheel both ends who are really, really pleased that Yeti is still doing something for them. So that's the spec, mechanical, feature and geo details on the bike. But like I say, what you really want to know is how this bike rides, and the best way to find out about that is to watch my live ride review video. So I'm going to put a link to that at the end and find out whether 27.5 still has a future when it comes to maximum fun mountain biking. But for now, massive thanks to Neil from Silverfish for bringing the bike up to demo. He's been riding with me on his SB140, so that's another bike I'm hoping to review shortly. Thanks to Silverfish UK for supporting the video as well. Massive thanks to my long-term channel sponsors, Zero Cycling UK, PE's Products, Torque Nutrition, Enduro Bearings, Crud XL Fenders and Hebtroco. Massive thanks, as always, to my Patreon supporters who subscribe on a monthly basis, and they get early and extended edits as a thank you, and they get them ad-free. They also get access to sort of more chat and advice based on all my years of bike testing experience. So if you really want to get behind the channel and get more out of the channel, then please consider joining my Patreon subscribers, and there's a link to that at the end as well. But for now, click for notifications, subscribe to the channel if you've not already, give this a thumbs up like, and tell your mates that there's a bloke who spends his time riding around on the latest bikes and shouting about them on video. And if you've got this far, then hopefully your mates will like it as well. But for now, I've been Guy Kesterman on Guy Case TV on Ilkley Moor on the medium wheel size but maximum fun Yeti SB135 T3 Lunch Ride Edition.